compulsive overeater, well, that's the C of OCD, and that is it's a recognized psychiatric disorder. The problem of addiction originates in the mind, but it's also in the biochemistry. Some people have a biochemical sensitivity to some substances. I choose not to eat any refined sugar or any refined grain, and I just find that my life is better and happier that way.
Welcome to Food Addiction, the podcast that helps you understand the disease of food addiction and presents the solution. We talk with experts and counselors who treat food addiction as a substance use disorder and with people who share their stories of recovery. The podcast is brought to you by the International School of Food Addiction Counseling and Treatment. Visit infactschool.com to become a certified food addiction professional. Stay tuned for this inspiring and informative episode. Today on Food Addiction, the problem and the solution, we welcome Michael Prager. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, glad you're here. I'm going to introduce you with your bio and then dive into some questions, if that's okay.
Yep.
Great. Michael Prager is an author and journalist located in Arlington, Massachusetts. He spent time editing at newspapers in Ohio, Florida, Massachusetts, Connecticut before returning to Greater Boston in 1993. After 14 years at the Boston Globe, he accepted a buyout offer and he departed in 2007. He spent time writing and working in the sustainability movement. His son was born in 2009 and he spent some time as a stay-at-home dad. He wrote the book Fat Boy, Thin Man, which profiles his struggle with food addiction, and he ultimately surrendered to the fact and learned to enjoy his life in recovery. Michael spent many years dieting, including 3 summers at Fat Camp, and was a patient of Dr. Atkins himself following the Atkins diet and had 2 separate 130-pound weight losses. Yet he reached his 34th birthday weighing 365 pounds. He felt trapped by the relentless compulsion to eat huge amounts of addictive trigger foods. The story in the book tells us that certain foods can be addictive, more addictive even than cocaine, nicotine, and alcohol. Addicted to multiple substances, he was surrounded by family and friends who were also trapped in addiction. He entered a food addiction recovery program ultimately in 1999 and has spent the last 25 years working in food addiction recovery. Ultimately, he allowed himself to be guided toward a different path and is now sustaining 155-pound weight loss. During his recovery, he has discovered that mainstream medicine offers no effective or safe treatment for the obese and suffering food addict. So, again, welcome, Michael.
Thanks.
Yeah, I loved your book. Loved it.
Thank you.
We host different kinds of guests. We host professionals like Dr. Robert Lustig, Dr. Paul Early, Teresa Wright, who I know you worked with. And we host food addicts. And you have the distinction of sort of being both. You've written books about your journey in food addiction, and you are a food addict. So, as I say, I love the book, Fat Boy, Thin Man, and we're going to put the reference in our notes so people can buy it. It was a really vulnerable and honest account of your life's journey to overcome food addiction. And like me, it took you a while to get in. And I would say after reading the book, I would make the observation that you were like me, you were pretty resistant. So talk about resistance and what stood in your way, and we'll talk about the book.
I want to say almost everything I say, some of it is original, but almost everything I say is stuff I heard from other people. And I'm just, they shared it with me so I could get better. And now I'm sharing it with other people so that they can get better.
Yes.
Just want to make, I always, whenever I mention my book, I like to say that the second sentence is, well, I'm no guru. And the first sentence is, everybody's looking for a guru, but that's not me. So I just like to make that clear.
Okay.
I live in Boston, and we have a phrase called wicked smart. And I thought I was wicked smart. And
Smart, you're saying. That's a Boston accent, but wicked
that
smart.
That is correct. Right.
Yes, I got it.
you couldn't tell me what I needed because I obviously knew. I was smarter than you and I had it all figured out. And, I don't, that's arrogance for sure, for sure. But, if you can, somebody said, if you can back it up, it ain't bragging. And the fact is that I couldn't back it up. I'm so smart, but I could not look at the circumstances, assess the situation to know that I couldn't back it up because I was, uh, in my early 30s. I was as big as a house. I was miserable. I was lonely, but I was isolating, which is
Yes.
not the way you resolve loneliness. And so I was sure that if I just did things better, took the information I had and applied it better, everything would be okay. And
Yeah.
that was not true.
Yeah.
That my experience is that was not true.
Right. Yeah, we know that food addiction, some of the smartest people I've seen in 12-step recovery rooms. And I think I'm pretty smart. And I think that's my thinking and my intelligence, your intelligence. You're highly intelligent. I respect your command of the English language and your vocabulary after reading the book. I had to look a
Thank
couple
you.
things up. um, so, yeah, that stands in our way because you were like me. When you dieted, you were really good at it, disciplined, and you lost weight. You were very successful at losing weight. But then as food addicts, we gain it back. So you've lost 130 pounds a couple of times. You've tried, done these diets, and you were at a food eating disorder program. But you seem to get the click from what I read, what I call the click, which is you got it when you went to Acorn, which in 1999 it was operated by Phil Wardell and Mary Fushi, who began a food addiction recovery program called Acorn. And you attended the 5-day intensive in 1999, and it's called now Shift by Recovery and is owned by Amanda Leaf. And for our listeners, it's foodaddiction.com. So we're going to talk about your story, but let's start by talking about Phil Wardell. We lost Phil on September 9th, 2023, last year. And I know you and Phil were friends, and I know Phil and worked with him. I went to Shift in May of 2019 when Amanda first bought Acorn and turned it into Shift, changed the name. And Phil was there during the intensive that I attended. I attended as in the leadership training program, but I attended as a student, so I know what goes on there. So talk about Phil and the legacy he's left, Phil Wardell, around awareness of food addiction and what he meant to your recovery.
Wow. We talked earlier about limiting our answers, and when I talk about Phil, I really have to be cognizant about that.
Yeah.
That you just mentioned two things: his effect on my recovery and his effect on the landscape of food addiction in the popular culture. And those are different questions, and they could go on for the answers could go on forever.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'd start with the personal. He did things for me that my parents couldn't do, and part of it is that he wasn't my parent, and so I was more willing, but he had a way of reaching out to me. I try to speak from the eye whenever I can, not describe what it was like for other people to be around him, but it's my opinion that what he did for me, he
Yes.
was also able to do for a vast number of people. I mean, thousands and thousands of people. He was also I don't know. He was also wicked smart. I mean, he was really very brilliant.
Yes, he was.
Had a PhD, and spent right up until he died, he was working on books that would further his crusade that food addiction needs to be understood by individuals, because if you don't know you have something, you can't get help for it, or maybe the
Right.
appropriate help for it. And for the medical community, for me, it's nutritionists who have to understand. Nutritionists. The most of the nutritionists I've met, both professionally and as a recovering food addict, want to make it okay. What's the problem you have eating? Oh, chocolate. Okay, I'll teach you how to eat that. Which would apparently works for or can work for people who are not food addicts, but they're not understanding that food addiction exists. They're adamant that food addiction doesn't exist. means that they're never going to say, oh, well, maybe you shouldn't eat any.
Right.
There are lots of things that I don't eat anymore, for decades. And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean I don't still like them. I don't still like
Yeah.
to eat them. It means that even if I like them, they don't like me, and it's better off when I don't have them. Anyway,
Right. Yeah.
we're talking about Phil. We want to get back to Phil.
You were talking
Uh,
about Phil. So yeah, he was very intelligent. His understanding of food addiction, and we're going to talk about, in your case, powerlessness and denial, which Phil, those were big themes for Phil and his work. So anything else you want to say about Phil? We're going to go on to your childhood.
yes, yes. I just he had a vision, and he was really dedicated. At his memorial service last month, I think, somebody called him the godfather of food addiction.
Yeah.
And he's not the only person by any means who has
Right.
carried this fight, but he carried it with dedication for decades, and with just he knew where he wanted to go, and he went there right up until he couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, he was a great man. Did a lot for food addiction. He was a prolific writer, very good writer. Let's talk about your childhood. You say in the book that your father had difficulty showing love. He was a bit of a workaholic, and your mother liked to control. And we
Hi,
know
Ma.
that
Hi, Dad.
yeah, we know that food addiction is a brain disease, that when some of us eat things, we start to get obsessed with them. We think about them, we make deals with ourselves, we that we will not eat more, and we can't help ourselves. That's the powerlessness. But also with food addicts like me and like you, we had childhoods that were less than ideal for us. I had parents. My mother was emotionally shut down. My dad was an alcoholic and food addict, and I didn't feel lovable. And so you were about my age. You're 1 year older, and talk about your childhood and how it influenced that may have set you up and contributed to being a food addict.
Okay. The first time I ever said "I love you" to anyone, those three words in a row, was I was in my mid 20s, and I'm not just talking about romantically. I'm talking about ever.
Okay.
So that's it was a different time, and I don't think that was that uncommon at the time.
Hmm.
I tell my son I love him every day, and that's this time.
Yeah.
And so I don't. It's true. Those characterizations are exactly how I painted them in the book. They're both gone. They won't be hurt by this. I
Right.
think they both read it, so they knew it before they went. Anyway, the point is
Yeah.
that they did the best they could, and
Do you
you
believe
know,
that?
yes, I do. I absolutely do. I think of people in recovery as being like this bulwark, this uh, wall. You know, parents did to kids, who became parents and did to kids, who became parents and did to kids, and it just through history, all this crap. And we who find recovery day at a time um, are like making the commitment, among other things. I mean, it's not even the first thing we think about, not even the 10th thing we think about. We're making the commitment to not pass on all that crap to our children. So they didn't
Hmm.
have that. And
Right.
yeah, they did their best. And I can easily, I'm a parent now, I can easily see how I would try my hardest to fix the problem that my son is experiencing and fail at it. So that's
Yeah.
all that happened. That's all that happened.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I think, God, is that the best you could have done, And so, but my parents are gone as well, and you and I think I can say this from your book, and I did this. I broke the cycle. Um, I gave
That's what I
love to
was
my
talking about.
children. Yeah, I broke the cycle of making kids feel like they're unloved, or pushing them too hard, or being emotionally disconnected. I changed that, and I can see my daughter with my grandchildren has changed it even more. She's a better mother than I was. But what it did for me was and I can see this in your book, that it set me up, that kind of treatment with being emotionally disconnected, not making me feel like I was okay in the world, set me up to feel like an outsider and get defensive. And I saw this in your book where, like, you people, parents, you don't care about me. I don't need you. I don't need anyone. And it forces me to depend upon myself. So I became very independent, and I'm smart. You're smart. And so we think we have all the answers, and we kind of come into the world with a shield. I read that in your book, and I'd love to hear what you have to say.
It's true. One of the things, I had an older brother as well, but I did not feel that I had anybody that I could go to and ask questions of.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I've made clear with my son, I am your guy. You got questions about anything, you come to me because I will help you answer. I will help you understand whatever's going on, even if I'm imperfect. He doesn't want to do that. A lot of times he just, keeps it to himself. So that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
I don't know why I ended up, they were older brother, younger sister. I don't know why I ended up as the far more closed off one.
Yeah.
Just family dynamics. Who knows? I can't explain it. That's
Hmm.
just the way it transpired. Uh, but I did. I thought that I could figure it out, and that delusion needed to be smashed. I
Yeah.
could not figure it out. When I started figuring it out was by stopping. Well, what I figured out was not whatever I was trying to figure out. It was that I couldn't figure it out.
Right.
And if I was so smart, why was I so unhappy?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's where I got to. But and we were late in this. A lot of people get into this a lot earlier, the recovery. But at 34 years old, your weight was as high as 365 pounds. You entered a eating disorders unit on Long Island. You stayed there for 9 weeks. Talk about the shame of obesity and the failed attempts at losing weight. I think anybody listening who might be a food addict would relate to that.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So because of what you say, that most could relate to it. I don't know how much new I could add. One thing that always sticks out to me is that, as you said, I lost 130 pounds twice before I began anything regarding recovery, and I eventually gained all that back and more each time.
Yeah.
But when you lose a large amount of weight, and then you gain it back, and so you're back where you started, you are not back where you started. You're much deeper, much worse off, because not only have you had this experience where it seemed like things were getting better, and then it's not like overnight you've gained 130 pounds back. It's day by day of this. Oh my god, I'm still doing this. Oh my god, I'm doing this. I can't wait to do more of it. I wish I couldn't
Yeah.
wouldn't do it, and all that. So you end up in a much deeper hole, and it is. I was demoralized. I was
Yeah.
demoralized. One thing I just want to say, my mother was
Yeah.
her. Part of her uh, approach was to be controlling. That's how she reacted with the world. But I kind of gave her some reason to try to want to control me, because she could see my life, even into my 30s, was not working out like anybody wanted. Not just like she wanted it for me. Like she knew that it wasn't working out the way I wanted it for me.
Yeah.
And so I try to give her a pass on that too.
Yeah, they want the best for us. They love us. They want the best, and they see us struggling. I mean, my mom was always saying, "Gosh, you're going to have to do something about your weight," and
Exactly.
doctors telling us that, and none of that.
Yeah.
I mean, the negative consequences don't make a difference. But Phil Wardell focused on a couple of themes, and this was my experience with him when I went through Acorn slash shift, and that is denial and powerlessness. And I'd like you to address those two themes, separately, and they are connected, of course. But denial, I weighed 203 pounds at one point. I was size 18. I had high blood pressure, diabetes. I've had 4 joint replacements. I was
Mm,
slowly killing
wow.
myself, and but we
Yeah.
don't see it. My family was worried. Talk about denial. As I look back at the photos now, I see, the denial. Talk about denial and how it worked in your food addiction.
Yeah. It's a big part of it is what I talked about earlier. If I, how could anyone, here I am thinking, my head will save me. How could anyone look at the situation I had, that had created around me, and think that's working out? That is the
Yeah.
right way to go about it. How could anyone do that? And yet I did that,
Yeah.
and uh, this is a stupid little example, but I went to test drive a car once, and I couldn't. I had trouble getting back out of the car.
Oh,
Just because I was too big for the space,
yeah.
and instead of thinking this is wrong, I shouldn't be living a life where this could happen, I was trying to convince the salesman who I'd never met and never saw again and didn't made it. I was trying to convince him that I was okay. This looks like a problem. It's not. It's okay. That is denial.
Yes. Yes, indeed. And then the powerlessness, Phil, wanted us, to write about the powerlessness. Where is the incident where you had powerlessness? And for me, it was standing in a condo in Fort Myers Beach in 2016, eating fudge, and I couldn't stop. And he says, and I think you put this in the book, there is a point at which all choice is lost. The power of choice is gone. The obsession, the compulsion take over, and we can't stop once we start. And powerlessness, you say in here, and again, you probably found this somewhere else, wanting to do something, but being unwilling and unable to do it. So, really, not being able to stop when you start, right?
Yeah, well, that's I got decades of that behavior. That's for sure. As you mentioned, Phil had this thing called "Write About an Incident of Powerlessness," and
Yeah.
his method was you do the physical part, and you go through this. First, it's just like a camera. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. Then you go back and you fill in and you talk about what I was feeling when this happened, and this happened, and this happened,
Yeah.
and then what was I thinking, and I what it was for the moment for me was when I said, and I could have, when I was describing what's going on, I know I could have, done something that would have been better, whatever it was. And I
Hmm.
stopped in the middle of the sentence, thought, no, I couldn't have. Maybe
Right.
it would have been better if I did, but I couldn't have. And that is powerlessness. It's when I stopped thinking I had the power that I started to get power. That is a
Yes.
paradox. I have looked into this in Wikipedia. The paradox entry has 250 plus examples of paradoxes. And so paradox is not even that uncommon. And
Yeah.
so, it seems like it is and it isn't and it can't be. And so therefore I reject it. Well, that's, prayer to me is a paradox.
Yes.
I don't think there is a white bear in the heavens sitting by the phone waiting to hear what I have to say. I don't think that is true at all. So I rejected it when, in fact, millions of people for thousands of years have been engaging in this practice and they have been benefiting from it. So they were all, idiots, or I was the idiot.
Yeah. We're going to talk about your where you went with higher power and God a little bit later, but yeah, we talk about emotions. And, for much of my life, and I think I read this in your book, uh, it was hard for me to tap into how I was feeling. I was working so hard. I was eating, I was drinking. Many of us are multi addicted. I know that you had issues with other substances. You had a cigar addiction for a while.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, we go to other things. And when I got sober, I went to food even more. And so I recovered from alcohol using food. I couldn't do both at the same time, but we're addicts. Yeah, that's what we are. But talk
Right.
about emotions and how difficult it was as a child and in your 20s, 30s. You didn't have your first girlfriend until you were 36, I read.
That's right.
So, yeah. Talk about the emotions.
Yeah. What encapsulates that for me was being in a therapy setting early on. And for the first time, this guy asked me what I was feeling. And I told him what I thought. And that's how I approach feelings. What did I think? And uh, and even if the answer was I think I'm afraid, that's a thought. That's not a feeling.
Yes.
And so I got to tell you, I recently dated a woman for 3 or 4 times, and she said, you weren't really interested in me at all. You
Mm,
weren't paying attention to me. And it brought up the same sort of feeling that I'm still doing that.
Mhm.
That my emotions are all wrapped up in what I'm about rather than what another person's about. Just in case anybody, I want to say I think I'm far better at that than I used to
Yes,
be. But I
I
still
can
got that
tell.
reflection from another, independent human being, so it's still going on.
Yeah. Well, we know in recovery, and we talk about 12-step recovery, and we know that we have character flaws, that they don't really go away. I still have an ego, I still get angry, you know, and I still want to control people, but I know when I do, I'm not grounded, peaceful, serene, and free. And
Hmm.
so every day I wake up and that's the goal, you know. And people were like, they say that you cannot know yourself by yourself. Okay. So
Good.
this woman
I
that you
like that. Yeah.
you dated, yeah, you can't know yourself by yourself. So
Yeah.
people, my family's very good at it. My kids are good at it. My husband, they tell me how I'm being,
Hmm.
and I need to hear it. So these character flaws come up, but what recovery does, what 12-step recovery does, is get you to look at it, listen to it, and be open to it. Like there was probably a time when you would hear something like that, and you're like, "Oh, she's full of it." She doesn't
Exactly.
know what she's talking, right?
Exactly.
But now you listen to it, and you're like, "Hey, she might be right. I wasn't listening to her."
And that's the thing, she might be right. It doesn't mean that she is right. Now you have to go about changing every part of me. I have to be present to hear that, and then I have to react. Oh, could this be something that I would benefit from knowing about, rather than,
Yes,
she's a bitch and I need to just find somebody else.
yeah, that's what recovery's done for me, is to really honestly look at myself. And so we're going to talk about your recovery. I want to get into what one of the things you said, which is, you know, recognizing what's going on, finally recognizing, what's going on, and really being open to it. But then the work begins, right? So on December 4th, 1999, I read in your book at 42 years old, you entered a 5-day intensive food addiction treatment program, which was called Acorn, now called Shift, owned by Amanda Leith, foodaddiction.com for our listeners. And that's where you got the click, as I said. And so you went through, I went through Shift, as I said, and you were kind of a tough nut to crack from what I gathered. You realized that it was not about the food and weight. And you said there was more work which remained for me, which you'd been in therapy, you'd lost weight, you'd gone to the place in Long Island, but you were still resistant and questioning how they were doing things and if this would even work. So I think talk about Acorn and getting in there, and then when you finally realize that, you know what, I think I've got this. I'm gonna surrender. It was really
Yeah.
profound.
I did go to the 5 day in Louisville, and it was, I spent time on it in the book, and it was a really important thing. My memory at 66 is not as great as it used to be. I'm pretty sure I had been to events with Phil and with Mary even before that.
Okay.
And just, I know that I just sure didn't come up with this one either. It just takes what it takes. You talk about the click, and I definitely understand what you're talking about. But for me, it was a really long click. It wasn't like, you know, right in. It was like it was forever, and it takes what it takes, and I was a hard case relative to my own image of myself.
So one of the things that you say in the book is dependable recovery has a spiritual component.
Mm,
But for years, and I think I could say I was like this, you fought the God thing, the higher power thing that 12-step recovery talks. But you I think were at peace with it. You found your own higher power in your God. Talk about that.
sure. Well, I love talking about this. And I came in, arrogant, militant, and confused. I thought God was an asshole, and I thought that he didn't exist. And anyone with a brain can figure out that you can't be anything if you don't exist. So I was really confused, but I was passionate in my position. And now I get on my knees almost every morning, and very often at night. At night, I don't get on my knees, but I before I go to sleep, I just say, thank you for everything that happened today, and it doesn't matter what happened.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's a little harder, but I know that it's all how I react to it, so it can all be good if I just approach it that way. Um,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I not only do I pray every day, one of the prayers, and I did not conceive this, or I don't think of it as a product of my intellectual mind, but I every day I ask for, please God, help me to be filled to overflowing with your love, so that I cannot possibly help but splash it on every single living being I come in contact with. And
Mhm.
earlier I would at an earlier time in my life, I decided that I wanted to get along better in the world, and one way I could do that was just to smile. Whenever walking down the street, just smile and at the person
Yeah.
approaching you instead of having a blank reaction. And I noticed
Mhm.
after a long time that that was also fake. It was a good try, but it was also fake. I didn't want to have a habit of smiling. I wanted to be smiling, to have it come from my
Right, and
heart.
feel it.
and uh,
Yeah.
and all of that is for me higher power related. That's where that comes from.
Yeah, I love a couple of the things here with how you reconciled God and higher power, and a couple of these are, you say that, um, in 12-step recovery, we say, "What would God have me do?" And you in the book, you say, "What would love have me do?"
Yeah,
I
well,
love that.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
That's the transitive property of mathematics, which I say just because it's makes me look nerdy. uh,
Yeah.
I'm trying to make fun of myself. My point is that I sometimes I don't get a burning bush. Sometimes I have never seen a burning bush ever. Okay, so to know,
Mm.
I'm supposed to seek God's will, and how do I know what God's will is? And but I had discovered, again, not the first person to do that, that God and love are the same thing. And so if
Yes.
I couldn't decide what God would have me do, this ethereal, unknowable being, well, I could substitute love. What would love have me do? And if I did the more loving act, even if it didn't work out, I could always look back, and instead of saying, "Fool, what were you thinking about?" Oh, I have a method, and I was following a path that I followed before, and that's following love. And never,
Yeah.
there have been many times when I thought back and thought, gee, I wish I hadn't have been so nasty. But I've
Yeah.
never thought, gee, I wish I hadn't have been so loving.
Right. Yeah, wonderful. The other thing I loved was a couple of relatives in your life when you were younger that kind of placed them as your higher power, your Uncle Joe and your Uncle
Yeah.
Albert.
Yeah. These are two guys that were both, neither of them married. So they had relatively more time to pay attention to me. And, I knew that they wanted the best for me. And it's not like they ever said,
Yes,
Michael, I want the best for you. I just knew it, the way they,
you knew it.
and, um, as, I think I said in the book, God should be so good, someone who just wants the best for me.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
um, it was easy. I don't think of, I think of them, but I don't think of them as I did when I was trying to, one of the concepts is you make up your own version of your higher power. And
Right.
so I made it up with them. And,
Right.
so I literally, well, I imagine them being on my shoulders. What would they have me do if
Mhm.
I didn't
Yeah.
know? And
Right.
yeah, so uh,
I love it. Yeah. Yeah, we talked about the click, and I just want to make the point in terms of the click for me, and we talk about bottoms. For me, at the end of my food addiction, and when I got into recovery and said I'm done, food and sugar beat me in a fair fight, and I now have to surrender and listen to what you people are telling me to do. You know, and that's how I recovered.
mhm.
And I hear that that's how you recovered. So that the click and the bottom, I think, can be, I don't want to say interchangeable, but it was the end of the road, for me. And I think that's what I heard at your experience with Acorn at the end of the intensive. And you were a tough nut. I mean, Mary kind of spotted your anger when you came in. you dealt with some pretty strong emotional trauma at the end, and talk about that. And you actually cried at the end, so you realized some things when you got in there. And I think that to me that was a shift for you.
It's funny. Yeah, yeah, I did cry, and I remember. I don't remember who gave me the reflection, but they said, I looked down and there were tears on my shirt, and it looked. They said it looked to them like I thought I was bleeding or something. Like, oh my God, what happened here? That it was so foreign. And I got to say, uh, I do not cry today, and I think it's a sign of emotional maturity and health to cry. And I think crying is
Yes.
good, and I haven't cried in years.
Yeah, it's hard to cry, you know? I don't cry very much. I can be moved to tears, but I think it's I think it's how we're wired. We have the ability to cry. If something was bad enough in your life, you would cry, right? But if you're moved, so moved.
Maybe, and I used to think I was a bad person because everybody knows when that happens,
Mm,
you're supposed to cry. And I don't anymore. I am who I am, and it's just fine the way
yeah,
I am. But I think that's a area of future growth, or an
yeah.
AFGO, as my friends say, another effing growth opportunity. But
Yes, I've heard that one
yeah.
before. But so you were at the end of, in shift, and you recognized the anger. And I know Phil and some of the work that goes on there, they brought that out of you. And I think what you realized was, I think you in the book you say you had some anger toward your mother, right?
Hmm.
And that you say anger was a stand-in for sadness, and
Yes.
it can be.
I usually have pointed out by now when I'm in a setting like this that my professional training is as a journalist. So anything I say, like what I'm about to say now, take it with a grain of salt because I'm a journalist. I'm not trained, but it's my strong opinion that people who show sadness to the world are often angry, and people who show anger to the
Yes.
world are often sad. And somehow showing one became more permissible, and in some cases certainly angry people, it's more rewarding. You get control, and I do believe that I was sad with how things were working out, and my reaction to it was to lash out. It's a parlor trick. I discovered this in rehab. My last name is Prager. And you had kind of, if you're listening, you kind of have to write it down to see it. But if you take the first letter and the last letter off my word, you're left with Rage. And
Rage.
that
Mm,
was a reflection of who I
wow.
had become. And I just want to say that
Mhm.
one of the counselors in the room, when I showed that, I made a poster of it. And the RAGE were all red, yellow, and on fire. And she said, "That's really interesting, but I think it would be better if you could find some other thing that would represent." That you could do with your name, wordplay, which again, for somebody like me is, and she was right. It was easy. Prager. If you change the G to a Y, you get prayer.
Oh, prayer. I love
And
it.
that's the title of one of my chapters, From Rage to Prayer. And it's my spiritual experience.
Mhm. Yeah, I love it. But you were angry at your mom, not to sound like you're in psychotherapy, but what was the anger about?
It was all, deep.
The control and
I don't parse it out like that. And
yeah.
I was angry at my mom, but I was angry at everybody. I don't think I was,
Yeah.
like Mondo angry at her and only just a little ticked off at everybody else. I mean, it was,
Mhm.
well, anger is how I interacted with the world. It's how I interface with the world, and uh, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. But everyone has their own path, and if that's what works for them, until they find that it's not working for them, go to it. But yeah,
Yeah.
if I haven't read my book in a little while. I don't. Uh, you know, the way I look at it today is that I had lots of anger toward the world, and now
Mhm.
I have less anger. And when I'm angry,
Yeah.
I can be angry without being acting angry. And My
Yeah.
life, I'm so much happier now because of that. You know, not
Yeah.
just that, but including that.
Well, we talk about how our lives transform in food addiction recovery. You've been recovered in recovery for 35 years, and you have experienced a full life transformation. And you said in an interview I heard, my life has transformed. I am a far more loving person, more willing to accept and consider other people's opinions. So, talk about your transformation and recovery,
Yeah,
what you've learned.
yeah. I don't know when I said that or when, you know, I know when I wrote the book, but if it was in an interview, you know, it could have been any time. And what I would say is that that's almost certainly more true now than it was then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did I make you cry? Wow.
uh,
Better than I thought I was at this.
yeah. You know, I was talking about it a little bit earlier. You know, I pray every day imperfectly.
Mm,
My son was late for school today. I did not get on my knees this morning, but I can still do that later. I be more loving toward everyone that I meet, and you know,
mhm.
there's a service aspect to that, but it's also like forgiveness. It's also a selfish act. I move through the world today in the company of someone who is more accepting, more loving toward others. And again, not perfect, and I slip. I just say I'm not a an
Yeah,
angel, but
me neither.
but I am in the company of myself, who is, you know, more shining in the world than grumbly. And that
Yeah.
pick your companion. Who would you rather have? Someone who's grumbly or someone who's shiny?
Well, who would you rather
Yeah.
have? That's really kind of like that's the thing about this disease is, when I was younger, my 30s, 40s, I was angry. I mean, anger is one of my character defects, and I responded to the world defensively, like, you can't do that to me.
Hmm.
So I'm a different person now, and that's what I see in you. As a matter of fact, when you left the Boston Globe and you were married at the time and you decided to be a stay-at-home dad, I thought, wow, that's a big change, and I can just tell you love your son.
Well, here's the thing. Did not want to be a dad. I thought I had sacrificed 30 years of my life to my disease, and now I just wanted to
Yeah.
enjoy the benefits of it. But I met a woman who wanted to be a mom, and it was just a package deal. And now we're
Yes.
divorced, and he's the most important thing in my life. So
Sure.
if I ever want to think that I know what's best for me, I only think of that. You know, I just have to show up a day at a time, do the footwork, and give up the outcome.
Right. What would love have me do, as you
Exactly.
say? We're going to shift our discussion here as we close out, and talk about what's going on in our society. We know that not all obese people are food addicts,
Definitely not.
and not all food addicts are obese people,
Hmm.
and that there are eating disorders
Hmm.
and compulsivity, as you make the point, is a psychiatric mental health disorder, and it gets tricky here with compulsive eaters. And you say in the book, and I believe this, that there are a lot more food addicts out there than we think. I mean, you just have to walk out in the world and you
Hmm.
see obesity, incredible amounts of obesity. And it's said by the year 2030 that, and that's just 6 years from now, that virtually half of Americans will be obese, not overweight, obese. So, talk about the obesity in our country as it might relate to food addiction, sugar addiction.
You know, when I started spouting that statistic, it was 33%. And I believe we
Mhm.
are now over 40. So clearly something's not working, you know, and, you know,
Yeah.
I was, as you've said, I was an advocate in this area for a long time. So I have a lot of facts that may still be true. You
Mhm.
know, the stats might have changed and stuff like that because I'm not as active in it as I used to be. But as I said earlier, if you don't know you have a problem, then you're not going to seek a solution for that problem. You're going to look at it as something else. And one thing I liked that you said was that it's so complicated. Compulsive overeater, well, that's the C of OCD, and that is a recognized. Not that compulsive overeating is recognized, but it's a recognized psychiatric disorder. And as you said, the problem of addiction originates in the mind, but it's also in the biochemistry.
Yes.
Two drunks go into a bar. It sounds like a joke, but two people go into a bar. One ends up in the gutter, and one goes home to bed. Why didn't the substance affect those people the same way or even close to the same way? Some people have a biochemical sensitivity to some substances. I choose not to
Yeah.
eat any refined sugar or any refined grain, and I just find that my life is better and happier that way. It's not a political issue. It's
Right.
not an emotional issue. It's just a fact for me. And I think
Right.
I've often said that I think that if, say, everyone listening to our conversation made a solemn oath and they really meant it to go without refined sugar and refined grain for, say, 30 days, enough for it to uh, rinse out of the body, that a third of them would make the decision not to go back, because now that they had actually experienced life without those things, they found it was better for them. So they weren't trying to impress anybody. They
Yeah.
weren't trying to, be a good doobie. They were just experiencing something that was better for them. And
Yeah.
I say that as a statistic. A third wouldn't. And the fact is, I know that nobody will ever disprove that, because most people, you make a suggestion like that, they say, "Are you kidding me? I would rather die." And
Yeah.
a lot of people can, a lot of us think, "Oh, I just have to,
Moderate.
yeah, exactly, cut down on the desserts." And for some
Yeah.
people, that's true. But for people like us, it is never true.
Yeah. Moderation. I mean, you talk about moderation in there, and my husband is a naturally thin man and been married for 41 years. In 1986, I saw him throw away a half-eaten ice cream cone. And I remember where we were and how he did it, and it's just like I was shocked. He's throwing away
What
that
is
perfectly
wrong
good
with
ice
him?
cream cone.
Yes.
What's wrong with him? So that's an addict, like I would have finished the ice cream cone. There's no way I wouldn't have. So like you say in your book, and we say in 12-step recovery, try some controlled eating.
Mm-hmm.
Can you eat just a packet of M&Ms if you have 3 or 4 more in your house? Can you eat just one and stop?
Mm-hmm.
If you're an emotional eater and you deal with the emotions, you should be able to recover with when you deal with the emotions. But food addicts, because of our brains, we're different.
Well, and as you said, it's so complicated because you could be both. You could have the
Yes.
genetic predisposition to addiction, but never be exposed to a substance that triggers that disposition. And as you said, a lot of people eat over emotion, and they can, or trauma, and they can deal with the roots of the trauma. And if they haven't yet crossed over, so flick that switch where addiction, the expression is, I'm a cucumber, I'm a cucumber, now I'm a pickle. And a pickle never goes back
Yeah.
to being a cucumber. It's changed and you can't go
Right.
back. So you could be a compulsive eater based on compulsion, based on trauma, and resolve the trauma. And if you haven't crossed over, then you can just go back to eating normally, because you don't have the trigger that
Right.
forces you there. But once you've crossed over, so there are people who have OCD but don't have the genetic predisposition. There are people who have the genetic predisposition but are never exposed to the substance that triggers it. So it's just so complicated. We're not saying that food addiction is the only thing, is the only answer, the only explanation for what's going on in America. We're saying it's one explanation, and it's a significant explanation. And if we can enlighten people, open up their minds to something they think is crazy. What do you mean food addiction? You need food to exist. How can I be addicted to something I need to exist? Well, there is an answer for that. I don't know if we have time for it, but there is an answer to that.
Yeah. We're going to go on to our final question. And it's about the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which issues diagnostic criteria from the American Psychiatric Association to determine what is an addiction. So currently, food addiction, sugar addiction is not recognized as a substance use disorder. A lot of people are working on this, including the owner of this podcast, Esther Helga Goodman-Stotier, Ashley Gerhardt, Dr. Lustig. We all want to see food addiction included in the DSM-5 as a substance use disorder. And that's when insurance will pay for the treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about, as we close out here, the DSM-5, and I know you have some writing in here about in your book.
Well, it's the same thing we were just talking about. That would be a sterling institutional recognition that this is more than just a bad habit. So that's why it's important. That's what Phil dedicated his life to, was to let people know that this also exists and that it is true for a lot of people. And it is important. I was recently asked. I'm a co-founder of the Food Addiction Institute, and
Yes, I know.
and I am that.
Thank you.
because I was with Phil and Mary.
Yeah, we'd like you back, by the way.
Actually, I put in a resume. We'll see I don't know what the process is, but
it's wonderful.
And I was asked the weekend of Phil's memorial, what do we need to do? What's the most important thing we need to do? And it is just this. It is public education. Yes. You can't seek help for something you don't know you have. And
right.
And if you know that it exists, then you can at least start to think, well, could I have it? What would that mean for me? Mm-hmm. How would I know? And you start exploring different questions than you've explored up until then. And so that's the most important thing we can do, is to, the DSM-5 is, or the DSM is just whatever number they put on it next, is just official recognition of what we already know.
Right. Yeah, there are 7 requirements as you outline in the book. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say them all, but tolerance, withdrawal, unintended use. There are 7 things. And just like alcohol, drugs are in the DSM and there is treatment for them. Mm-hmm. We need to have food addiction in there, and sugar addiction. And so, yeah, that's a whole different program. And we're all working for it. And I'd love to see you back on the board. So we have a board meeting coming up. I will vote for you. Thank you, Michael. I love the book, Fat Boy, Thin Man. And we'll put the link in how to buy the book in our notes. And Esther and I appreciate you taking the time. Congratulations on an incredible journey in recovery from food addiction.
Thank you. I'm very fortunate.
Yeah, we both are.
Very fortunate, and I know it. Thanks for your time. Thank you. Thanks to Esther for asking me, and it was a lovely conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Food Addiction Podcast. We hope you both enjoyed the episode and learned more about how food addiction is recognized and treated. Please rate and write a review on this podcast and share it with others. If you or someone you know is suffering from the disease of food addiction, there is a solution with trained professionals at the INFACT School. You can become a food addiction informed and certified as a food addiction professional, as well as receive your own treatment through the various training, certification, and treatment programs offered at the INFACT School. Go to infactschool.com, that's INFACT school.com, to learn more.
Are you passionate about helping others overcome food addiction? Do you dream of making a real difference in people's lives? Look no further than the INFACT School, the first and only program that offers an accredited international professional certification for food addiction professionals. With over 170 hours of engaging and informative online virtual teaching sessions, you'll delve deep into the world of food addiction and gain the knowledge and skills needed to make a lasting impact. Our experienced instructors, who are leading experts in the field, will guide you through the latest research and evidence-based practices. The INFACT School goes beyond theory and equips you with the hands-on skills you need to support individuals on their journey to recovery. You'll gain invaluable experience working directly with clients under the supervision of our faculty. Upon completion of our program, you'll be a certified food addiction professional. ready to make a positive impact in the lives of those struggling with food addiction. Join the IMFACT School today and be a part of the solution. Together, let's conquer food addiction and build a healthier future for all. Visit our website at www.infactschool.com to learn more and enroll in our professional training program. The journey starts here at the IMFACT School.